Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Glad to have you with me, so I've been appreciative of some of the positive comments I've received. Thank you very much. And even if you have some negative comments, yeah, I'm a big boy, I'll take some of those too, but I would really appreciate some of your suggestions for topics of upcoming vlogcast or podcast or what we're calling here. Hey, wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor. I spoke about him in another podcast. Not always sure about how Frank is going to put these podcasts out, so I did want to give him a shout out. So let me bring up his information here so I make sure I get it right. Aaron Bray of Servant Labs Limited Company. He is a webmaster, Truth in Advertising. I've hired him to do work on my website. No, it's not his fault that I'm not getting the traffic that I would like. It's not his job, but he was cleaning up some things that I messed up with. So and I'm appreciative. Aaron, want to thank you. So how do you get a hold of Aaron? He's at servantlabs.com. That's servantlabs.com. Do hope you pay him a visit. Perhaps if you have a WordPress site or maybe even other sites. I worked with him because I have a WordPress website, wildlifecontrolconsultant.com, and he can certainly help you. You can email him at Aaron, that's AARON, at servant, SERVANT, labs, LABS.com. That's Aaron at servantlabs.com, and you can certainly learn more about his company at servantlabs.com. I think you'll find that he could probably help you out or know someone who could if you're looking for someone to deal with your website. So many thanks to our sponsor there, Aaron Bray, and we would love to have others. So if you happen to be interested in our audience group, we would certainly appreciate the support of our sponsors. So I do hope you patronize him. Well, what's on the topic for today? Well, I want to talk about mothballs. Mothballs are just one of those things that just irritate any good pest control operator or wildlife control operator because they are notoriously abused around the country. Everyone and their cousin thinks that if they throw some mothballs around, it's going to quote-unquote drive the animals away. You've probably heard of this. I wish I had $1 for every time I heard one of these people tell me, well, I threw mothballs underneath the deck and the skunk went away. And so it is just irritating. So you're asking yourself the question, if mothballs worked half as well as the public thought they did, why are we in business, or how can we be in business if they simply eliminate all of these wildlife issues? We just throw some mothballs around and all of a sudden the world goes away. Then why are we here? You know, this is the thing that people never seem to ask themselves. So I wanted to sort of delve into a little bit on mothballs. It's a complex subject, but we can be geeky here in the Pest Geek podcast, so I'm going to get a little geeky on you here today and hopefully give you some tidbits and things that you probably wouldn't want to take the time to read on your own because it's boring. Oh my God. But it's going to be helpful for you in terms of responding to your clients, understanding your clients, and hopefully maybe you can push back just a little bit of the ignorance that's out there regarding mothballs, because there is a lot of it. So why don't we get started at the beginning? Why do people think mothballs work? Okay, well, part of the reason people think mothballs work because, wait for it, sometimes they do work. Yes, you've heard it from me. Yes, the Stephen Van Tassel, Wildlife Control Consultant, you actually heard me say this. Yes, sometimes mothballs actually work. Now, let me give you the rest of the story about this. Mothballs have an odor that's noxious to animals. Now, I kind of like the little bit of smell of mothballs, probably showing my age. You know, that naphthalene smell or the paradichlorobenzene, you know, it kind of smells the same. And it kind of, you know, they use it to sort of help alleviate some of the odors in bathrooms or used in toilets and that sort of thing. But part of the thing that to animals, it is noxious. They don't like the odor being there. And so if you can get mothballs in a high enough concentration where the gas levels are high enough to be irritating to the animal that's there, they will move out of the way. Now, where they move, how far will they move, that's a separate question, but they will move out of that area. So you have to have typically a confined space and a high enough concentration of mothballs to get the job done. Now, most people will never use that much, and if they do, like if you're just throwing a handful of mothballs up in the attic, I'm not recommending this, folks. Don't take me as recommending this. I'm not recommending that. I'm just simply saying that if people do this sort of thing, things can happen. So if someone just throws a handful of mothballs up in the attic, that's not going to be enough concentration to do anything. Okay, the placebo effect can be very powerful. That's not what I'm referring to here. But it's not going to do anything in terms of driving that animal away. If it leaves, it's leaving for other reasons. It's not leaving because there's a few mothballs in the attic. However, there have been clients who will literally take pounds or boxes of mothballs and place them every few feet in the attic. That can very well likely be a high enough concentration of mothball gas to drive an animal out of the attic. Now, here's the downside. Aside from illegalities, which this is illegal, okay, it's a violation of FIFRA, the fungicide, insecticide, rodenticide, federal insecticide. Oh gosh, I forgot what the acronym stood for, but it's the Federal Insecticide Rodenticide Act. Oh, Fungicide Rodenticide Act. There we go. Federal Insecticide Fungicide Rodenticide Act. Got it. There we go. That's kind of a little blast from the past. So FIFRA says you have to follow the label. Okay? Well, people aren't following the label if they're putting boxes of mothballs in their attic, because if they read the label, it's going to say, put it in an enclosed container. If this is for moths, or, you know, there have been sometimes certain forms of mothballs and some of the ways they're situated are used in around bird cages or inside of a bath, a toilet or something like that. An attic is not it. Okay. Now, there are products that contain mothballs that may be allowed inside of an attic. I'm thinking of Bat Away or Bat Scat, I think, if the memory serves. I believe that one. I'd have to look at the label again, because this is only going to be part one of our talk about mothballs. So this is not going to be the end-all and be-all of this today, or just kind of introducing the subject. But the point is the homeowner has violated the label. So I hope no PCO, that no wildlife control operator is dumping mothballs in someone's attic. But my point is, if you can get concentrations high enough, it will drive animals out. That's my bottom line here. Not that I'm recommending it. Don't do it. But when people do, that can work. However, most often when people talk about mothballs, and they say mothballs have worked, and I put that in quotes. Here's the scare quotes, right? The quotes, that it worked. They're often doing what's called confusing correlation with causation. You may have heard this phrase when you were in high school. It is when just because two events occur in proximity to one another doesn't necessarily mean that one event caused the other event to occur. Let me illustrate. I have a headache. I stepped on a scale and I lost 10 pounds. can I therefore say that the headache caused me to lose 10 pounds? Or that losing 10 pounds caused me to have a headache? Right. You're probably saying to yourself, no, Stephen, that's stupid. Of course it's stupid, right? There is no necessary correlation between my having a headache and losing 10 pounds in a day. Okay. Or to put it the situation even more starkly, I stood on a scale, I lost 10 pounds, and I saw a weather balloon or someone's recreational balloon off in the distance. You'd say, Stephen, you're seeing the weather balloon or the recreational balloon had nothing to do with your losing 10 pounds. Yes, but that's what people think. They think because I threw mothballs by the deck and the skunk was no longer there, therefore the mothballs caused the skunk to leave. That is called the correlation causation fallacy. Just because two events occur side by side to each other doesn't mean that one event caused the other event to occur. Unfortunately, your client doesn't think that carefully. You, as a professional, have to. So, let me give an illustration. What's a counter argument? The client's skunk may have gotten hit by a car when it was out foraging that night. So the homeowner thinks that the mothballs drove the skunk away, when in fact the skunk is dead because it got hit by a car. So therefore, the skunk didn't come back because it couldn't come back. But yet they'll claim that the mothballs caused it. Now, unbeknownst to the homeowner, the skunk's dead 2 streets over, right? So this is a common fallacy of people and it occurs a lot. Okay, don't fall for it yourself. In order to prove the causation, you have to have a lot more data. The other issue is sometimes there's just the mere disturbance of a den or the mere disturbance of a nesting area is enough to cause an animal to move. For example, when you're using certain repellents for, let's say, raccoons, a female raccoon with her young, sometimes whether you have, raccoon testicles or using coyote urine, again, these are technically pesticides. They need to be EPA registered. I don't agree with the law, but it is what it is. You have to make sure you're following whatever rules you are. I'm not recommending these products. I'm just trying to give concrete illustrations for people. Sometimes, even if you used water, put some water on a tennis ball and tossed it over to where the raccoon was. Was it the water that got her to leave, or was it the mere fact that you tossed an object and she realized that her nesting area, her den, was not secure anymore? So what caused what? So sometimes the mere fact that someone paid attention to that skunk den, threw some mothballs there, may have been enough for some skittish animals to move on. Or maybe they wanted to move on because there were too many fleas in it. I mean, who knows, right? So the point is that you have to be careful of this idea of causation versus correlation, even when we're doing things that we think have a causative effect. It may be more complex than that. That's why oftentimes scientific research is so expensive, because they have to do enough experiments in order to account for what's called chance. Sometimes we just get lucky. You throw a trap out there and an animal walks into it. Is that proper baiting procedure? Is that proper trapping procedure? No, it's not proper. But sometimes you just get lucky. And so we don't want to have the lucky as simply just pure randomness as being the standard by which we're saying something caused something else. All right, so I hope that is perfectly clear. So those are reasons why people continue to think that mothballs work. So let's drill down a little bit more into mothballs themselves, because mothballs, we talk about them as if they're a single entity, but they're not. Mothballs come in two different forms. One is naphthalene, and the other one is paradichlorobenzene. Naphthalene is a byproduct, or is a chemical produced from oil. Paradichlorobenzene, I'm assuming, also comes from an oil or petroleum type derivative, but it's manufactured, its chemical formulation is somewhat different. Many of your mothballs that you're purchasing in a store today will be paradichlorobenzene. However, if you look hard enough and you look at the label of mothballs, you will be able to probably find the naphthalene versions. So the naphthalene is certainly an older version. According to Wikipedia, if there's a level that's reliable, it said part of the reason why manufacturers were moving to more of a paradichlorobenzene was it was a little safer in terms of its fire hazard. I haven't been able to confirm that yet. I'm going to drill down a little bit more into paradichlorobenzene in another podcast, but for this podcast, I just want to focus in on naphthalene. Naphthalene is the active ingredient often used in some of your repellents that are out there. I saw a label for a snake away that uses naphthalene. Not very much, by the way. I think it was only 7%. And then I think it just used sulfur. But it is used in that particular product. So I just want to talk a little bit about naphthalene. And a lot of this is based on the MSDS sheets, or more common, or more recently known as the SDS sheets. They've sort of been changing the names. And so you may see one or the other out on the internet. And I would encourage you, on any products that you're using regularly, that you not only have the pesticide label, that would be required, but some of your states may require you to have the SDS sheets with you as well. And even if they don't, it's probably not a bad idea for you to read it, because there's some interesting things inside the SDS or MSDS sheets that will be helpful for you to understand what you're using. And so if your client has questions, you can, sometimes it's just good practice, hand them the SDS sheet. Here you go, ma'am. And that way it's not you talking, it's the manufacturer talking. So a lot of the information I'm going to provide you here is based on the SDS sheet, but I've also included some material from the CDC and a website that covers pesticides out of Oregon. So why don't we go down through this particularly. So we're dealing with naphthalene. Again, naphthalene is one of the chemicals used to make mothballs. Now, mothballs can come in flakes or in little balls, and it's typically white. I even saw one online that was scented, had a particular scented version for it, so obviously they added something to the mix. So let's talk about the CAS number. That's CAS as C-A-S, the CAS number. The CAS number is a identification number that you can actually search on it. Think of it like an EPA registration label. You can search on that chemical and get a lot of information on naphthalene if you decide to search on its chemical CAS number. Now, a lot of this is very technical. Unless you're a chemist, some of it can get really far into the weeds. However, there's a lot of information in here that's going to be helpful, even for those of us who are applicators and putting stuff out in the field, because it talks about things like, what's its flammability? Is it a carcinogen, or is it a suspected carcinogen? What's its flash point? What are some of the hazards related to it? How should you store the product? in a variety of other little things. How can you poison yourself with it? What are the means by which you can poison yourself with it? So these are some of the questions that are going to be answered by that MSDS sheet. So let's kind of go down through some of that. So let's talk first about the CAS number. That's the CAS number. And for naphthalene, it's 91-20-3. That's 91-20-3. So that's the naphthalene CAS number, and you can learn a lot just by Googling that. Same way you can do that with other issues. Okay, so let's take a look here at this particular product. So it says on our MSDS sheet that how can you poison yourself with this particular product? How are you exposed to it? Well, inhalation obviously would be number one, right? Because it's gassing off. It sublimates. Mothballs sublimate, which means it goes from a solid to a gas with no intervening liquid form. Like if you have ice, it goes from solid to a liquid. Then if you boil it, it goes to a gas. Well, mothballs skip the liquid part. They just go from a solid to a gas. Now, can you melt them? Yes, you can. If you put them in the fire, they will melt. Okay? And so there will be a liquid state. But under ordinary room temperature conditions, it goes from a solid to a gas. That's one reason why they're used in clothing. You're not going to deal with any liquid right there. So inhalation obviously is a big one. Ingestion. Now, why would people eat this? Well, most people don't eat them. However, children do stupid stuff, right? So they get into mothballs, they start gobbling them down for whatever reason. It can be fatal, and it's actually caused an enormous number of injuries from children who have eaten this product, and it also causes injuries to children who have inhaled this product. Because remember, children are not just little adults. They are actually much more fragile than adults. They have less blood in their system. They have to breathe more frequently, so they're going to be exposed to inhalants far more seriously than an adult would, because we have significantly greater mass. We're so much larger. We have a lot more flexibility to do bad stuff to our bodies, okay? So you shouldn't be breathing mothballs. It's bad for you, okay? But children, it can be deadly for them. You can also be exposed through eye contact by the dust. So that would obviously be a bigger risk if you are using the flakes, I would suppose. And then, of course, skin contact. You like skin contact? Yeah, it would be prolonged exposure to mothballs. Like if you just stuck your hand in it for, I don't know, how many days would it be? Or if you were repeatedly exposed. In other words, you just simply said, I'm going to be using mothballs. I'm just going to keep grabbing it with my bare hands and using it. Over time, as you get those repeated exposures, you may develop a sensitivity to it and have some absorbed that way. So be careful with pesticides, folks, okay? There's a reason for these safety labels that we need to follow the instructions here. And, just like I rarely touch an animal without gloves on, I think it's a good idea for people when you're dealing with pesticides, just wear the appropriate gloves. It's just wise practice because we don't know what those micro exposures are. So the document also says that it's a flammable solid. It makes sense. It comes from a petroleum product. Naphthalene is a petroleum derivative, and it burns. Okay, and so what this means is that if you're placing this particular product in a hot area, is it going to gas off faster? Perhaps. So what are the percentages that it's flammable at? Well, it says 0.9% to 5.9%. Now, I interpreted that to mean that was the level of concentration of gas that was needed, because remember, if you remember from your science classes, gasoline doesn't burn. Gasoline vapors burn, right? I think I saw an experiment done one time where a guy just took a match and just shoved it in the gasoline and it didn't burn. However, when he just put the match slowly toward the top of the gasoline, don't do this at home, folks. At the top of the gasoline, then it burned. I had that experiment done I saw it done a little bit less violently with a candle, where the person was showing that it was actually the gas, not the wax, that burned. And so he just was able to light the wick, let the candle heat up a little bit, and then he blew it out, and then he just brought the match close to the wick and it lit. Why? Because the gases around that wick were what were being ignited. So I suspect that what's happening with mothballs is when the mothball gases get to 0.9% or up to 5.9%, because if the concentration's too high, things don't burn. Then it can ignite. You can ignite it. Now, what does that mean? Let's think about that for a minute. Let's say you have people putting a pile of mothballs inside of their attic, and for some unknown reason, there's a spark up there. Maybe there's a short, or who knows what could happen. You could have an ignition event occur in an attic over this. So this stuff's flammable. It can be explosive when there's sufficient mixture with air. Now think about that for a moment. There's a difference between something that burns and something that explodes. Okay, explosives are massive chain reactions of an ignition event. It is categorically far more serious than something just simply igniting. Now, is it a carcinogen? It's unknown. A carcinogen is something that causes cancer. Does exposure to mothballs, naphthalene specifically, does that cause cancer? We don't know. However, according to the EPA calls it a Group 2B. Now, what does that mean? So let me pull up a website here to make sure I can tell you what this means accurately. And let me read it for you here. This is from the EPA website. It's called Hazard Identification for Carcinogenic Effects. So what they do is they take all of these products, all of these chemicals, and they evaluate whether or not they can cause cancer. Now, that's a big task, right? Because it takes a lot of research to do this. And so it's a moving target, because as we continue to learn more about products, their status can change. So let me give you what the levels are, because you'll sometimes read phrases like it's a Group A carcinogen, or it's a Group C carcinogen, or it's a Group E carcinogen. And so let me read right from the EPA website what those categories mean. So let's start together. All right. So a Group A, when a chemical is classified as a Group A carcinogen, it means it's carcinogenic to humans. Agents with adequate human data to demonstrate the causal association of the agent with human cancer. So in other words, they have enough data to believe that this particular product causes human cancer. Okay? Group B products are probably carcinogenic to humans. These are agents with adequate human data, these are agents with sufficient evidence from an animal bioassay. In other words, they've done research on animals, but either limited human evidence that's indicative of a causal relationship, but not exclusive of other alternative explanations. That is Group B1, because they divide Group B into two different categories. Group B1 is probably carcinogenic to humans. Group B2 is probably carcinogenic to humans, but there is little to no human data, where Group B1 has some human data. Okay? So Group A, carcinogenic. This is going to cause cancer. Group B is probably, and if it's a B1, we have some evidence to show that it causes cancer in humans, but not enough. Group B2, we have little to no human evidence. Okay? Group C is possibly, notice it went from probable in Group B to possible in Group C, These are agents that have limited animal evidence and little or no human data. Group D is not classifiable as to human carcinogenicity. Agents with inadequate data either to support or refute human carcinogenicity. And Group E is evidence of non-carcinogenicity for humans, agents that show no evidence for cancer causing. In at least 2 animal tests in different species or in both adequate epidemiological or animal studies. All right, so that's a lot to take in. All right, so Group A causes cancer. Group B probably causes cancer, but we need more evidence. That's divided into 2 groups, depending on how much evidence there is. B1 has more evidence for cancer causing than Group B2. Okay? Group C it's possible that it's carcinogenic. Group D, we can't classify it. Data goes either way. Group E is there's evidence to actually argue that it's not carcinogenic. All right? So, where does naphthalene stand on all this? Well, depending on which document you read, I read conflicting information. I had an MSDS sheet that said it was classified as a B2, which you'll recall is possibly carcinogenic with little or no human data. And another document from the CDC called it Group C, which you will recall is possibly carcinogenic. Now, to make matters even worse, California has their own standard for evaluating cancer-causing materials, and it classifies naphthalene as causing cancer. So who do you believe? Well, it's a good question. I would just simply err on the side of caution. If you're using products with naphthalene in it, don't huff it. Okay? Don't be breathing that nonsense, right? So just use it the way the label tells you to use it. Try to minimize your exposure to the extent you can. But understand, and again, I'm not a cigarette Nazi, folks. I'm not out there beating up on cigarette people, right? If you want to smoke, I have far less objection to cigarettes than I do alcohol, right? So, but that's another story. But if you smoke, understand that part of the chemical that you're actually breathing in is naphthalene, and you're consuming that on a regular basis every time you smoke. It's a byproduct of the combustion activity of a burning cigarette. So naphthalene, we're exposed to naphthalene in a variety of different ways, okay? So you just want to minimize your risk like you would with any chemical. I'm not trying to overstate this risk. There's probably far bigger dangers out in the world. But again, if you don't have to, why do it, right? It's not a contest, folks. You don't need to be showing, hey, I exposed myself to, 5 liters of naphthalene gas last week. Woohoo! Don't do that. It's not a contest, right? We want all of you to be healthy, wealthy, and living a long life, enjoying your work in the pest control and wildlife control fields. All right, so let's just be careful out there. But the information is conflicting. My suggestion is err on the side of caution, minimize your risk, and you'll probably be fine. Okay. So, what else did this SDS sheet talk about? Well, what's interesting here is that it also mentioned don't store naphthalene in temperatures above 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember we talked about the attic issue again? Now, why doesn't it want temperatures being that high? My suspicion is it melts and it's probably gassing off, and it's becoming far more problematic. I'm having a little issue here with my computer. My apologies. It's probably gassing off far more aggressively, and it could be possibly melting at that 100.4. So again, there's risks with some of this stuff, okay? So be careful where you are applying it. But there's certainly more. Several states have requirements about the application of naphthalene. California, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Massachusetts. Now, I don't know if that's a complete list or not, because remember, SDS sheets or MSDS sheets are dated. I mean, unfortunately, the one I read wasn't dated, but they're time limited. In other words, they're not eternal. Things change over time, so you want to make sure you're getting up-to-date information. Now, does that mean all products containing naphthalene? I don't know, but it's something that I found in the MSDS sheet for naphthalene. For those of you living in that state, that might be another reason. Do I really want to report my use of a naphthalene product, or am I required to? Now you bring up another level of uncertainty with your product. This is, as a side note, this is why we need to oppose these notification requirements. It's just one more level of burden. Should you be informing your client? Absolutely. Do you necessarily have to be? Should you have to be required to notify every neighbor around the area? I think that becomes a little obnoxious, unless there is some realistic risk of that pesticide drifting or getting over to your to a neighbor. Then that would be a different story, in my opinion. What's the bottom line about naphthalene exposure? We talked about cancer causing, but it does cause some other injuries when you get it in sufficient doses, and that is it actually breaks down red blood cells. And this is going to be significantly more important for children. Obviously, all of them are small, and infants, because of the effect naphthalene can have in their bloodstream. If they get enough dosage of this, or if they eat it, or are breathing it consistently, this can be a problem. Can it be a problem for adults too? Absolutely. But typically adults aren't standing in an area with high doses of naphthalene unless, they've done something silly like put mothballs all over the place and they're just breathing it constantly. Or they've, trying to commit suicide perhaps, eating it. Most adults aren't eating mothballs. But that is an effect of mothballs. So, can mothballs drive an animal away? Yep. If they're in sufficient quantities, I believe that it can. Is it necessarily legal in terms of how they're often used? No. Typically, people are using mothballs illegally, and naphthalene is an active ingredient in registered EPA products, but again, you should be following those particular labels to the T, but also recognize some of the risks that will be told to you in the SDS or MSDS sheets, and certainly you want to minimize human contact. So let me give some scenarios. If you had a situation where a family had small children, is it something to be concerned about if you're putting out a naphthalene-based product on their property? You might want to ask the question, ma'am, do you think the likelihood that the child may be eating this? Now, if the child goes outdoors and gets into it and just says, well, let me put this in my mouth. These are some questions you need to ask yourself, because this product is applied in ways that are exposed to the public. It's not often used in the tamper-resistant bait station, so a child could theoretically get into it. Be careful out there. And so understand a little bit more about mothballs. I'm hoping to have another podcast down the road where we get into paradichlorobenzene and delve into that particular product a little bit, because again, when we talk about mothballs, they come in two different forms, so you need to understand that which form are you referring to. And today we were just talking about the version of naphthalene. So check out your MSDS sheets or the SDS sheets. Read that material to learn a little bit more. I've given you sort of a smattering information here, and also explained a little bit about how things are evaluated cancer causing wise, because that could be kind of scary when people hear that. So hope that was helpful for you. I'm Stephen Van Tassel, Wildlife Control Consultant. thanks for listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Would love to hear from you. My email is wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out Servant Labs if you're having some issues with your website or you want them to take a look at it. Again, I had a WordPress site, so definitely check out Servant Labs. We want to thank our sponsors. And if you're interested in being sponsored by, be a sponsor of our group, do reach out to me. Again, same email address, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. And lastly, if you have products, books, videos that you would like to have reviewed or spotlighted or evaluated on the Living with Wildlife podcast, drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you if you have ideas or topics. Always looking for people doing interviews with people. Again, reach out to me. I'm pretty available. Again, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Have a great day. Be safe. Be educated. Go out and make some money and make a difference in someone's life. Thanks.